Hey everyone, today we're going to be going over Who's That Knocking at My Door by Martin Scorsese. This is going to be my review of the movie. It's honestly a really interesting movie. Uh, there's so many different flavors to this film, so many different aspects. One of the things that I really love about this movie is that they keep everything in motion. Even whenever there's different cuts, different camera shots, basically everything and everyone stays in motion throughout this film. Even the characters' desires, the way that they're acting, their inner relationships, basically everything about the movie is staying in motion. So it's a very enticing movie to watch. So here is the main character, JR. He is I would say a really divided character, which is really fascinating. You can see that a lot of the times he almost seems like he's being pulled in one direction and then at the same time being pulled in another direction, which really creates for a fascinating character profile for him. Some of the most interesting characters in movies are the ones that aren't really exactly as they seem. You can really see that he has a divided soul, and that becomes more and more apparent throughout the film. He seems pretty straightforward in the beginning. He seems more along with his other friends, they're basically derelicts. They live in Staten Island, and they've got some violent tendencies. Some of them are robbing people, kind of in a sense doing what they can to make it by and everything, while getting a little bit of action on the side. So, but I think he also wants kind of more of an honest life, not necessarily a clean life, but I don't know. It seems that there's some things throughout the movie that kind of indicate that he wants to almost be more of a just straightforward person. This is one of the other characters, basically his love interest throughout the film. It's just a girl that's referred to as Girl. She's kind of the same way, where she seems like one way in the beginning, and then as time goes on, she's kind of developing into something else. Or I guess probably more so, we're seeing the actual characteristics of her. I guess in the way that she's presented in the beginning is really straightforward, as well as JR was. She just seems like a nice girl, and not to say that she doesn't remain nice throughout the movie, but you just get to see more of her character, and it again makes for more of an interesting character profile where she's not just straightforward. I mean, in the beginning, she's basically almost just seems like a normal, typical girl from that period that's portrayed in films. But one of the things that I find most interesting about her is that she basically develops a backbone throughout the movie, which is another thing where you don't know if she maybe just already had a backbone as a character in the beginning, and then it wasn't really shown that she was like that. But I really like towards the end how she stands up for herself, and she's not just basically willing to take whatever guys are pushing on her. So I think that makes for a really interesting character, and I think that she's really lovable. She seems really sweet too, which that remains throughout the film, so that's not something that changes, which I really like. Yeah, and so right now, basically, we're getting into the point where their relationship is starting to actually develop. In the beginning of the movie, they were kind of being coy and cute with each other and stuff. But now we're at the point where things are actually developing. And here's one of the first signs that you start seeing of JR's character with his inner turmoil and what I mentioned earlier, where basically he's divided. I mean, even something as simple as they're obviously clearly wanting to love each other and stuff, but there's almost a hesitation with him. It makes for a really interesting character profile because it's not just straightforward like a love story or anything. You can see that there's different things that are pulling on his heartstrings, but they're not really showcased directly. So it makes for a really interesting viewing experience. This is one of my other favorite things about the movie is just the random characters that JR is friends with. They're really entertaining. They're also, I guess, divided because sometimes they'll be like completely like silly. Sometimes they'll be really nice. This is actually a great example in this scene of basically how they are divided, where even something as simple as them hanging out turns into one of the characters basically grabbing another by the neck and pointing this really small gun at him. Now, nothing ends up happening. The guy just in the end shoots a bottle and they're all laughing, and then the other friends are kind of running off laughing while he's doing that to the other guy. So it's really interesting. Um, During this part of the film, basically JR had been explaining to Girl after they had seen Rio Bravo. He's talking about there's this female in the movie that he's referring to as a broad, and then he's basically explaining his interpretation of a broad, basically saying that they're the type of women that you wouldn't want to marry. And then you get this really interesting, almost like dreamlike sequence where it's going through showcasing basically his experiences with those types of women. And yeah, that ties into another one of my favorite parts about this movie. I mean, I mentioned earlier how there's a bunch of like interesting cuts and different camera angles and stuff that make this really interesting, but one of the best parts about it is the fact that a lot of times, honestly, the way that the film is presented to you is almost like a dream-like sequence. Like even with the situation where basically you get a cut where it goes from him explaining like his interpretation of broads to him having these experiences, that feels like a dream-like sequence. It's not just a direct like representation of what he's imagining them to be. It's almost like a dream-like sequence where even with something like that, it seems divided. The way that it's presented to you is almost like hazy. The way that it's cut and everything. Yeah, it's just really interesting, and one of the dreamlike sequences and the dreamlike feeling of this movie is really interesting. One of my favorite parts about the film, really. So now we're starting to get into basically one of the most major points of conflict in the movie, which is whenever JR is talking to Girl and she reveals to him that basically a guy had taken advantage of her. It was, I believe, the last guy that she was dating, or maybe just a random guy that she was dating. So she reveals that she's not a virgin and he basically forced himself on her. And this is one of the most, like, I would say, depraved parts of the movie. JR is not only like not supporting her, but he's essentially saying that for one, she might be a liar, and also he's saying like, who would believe your story? So this is one of the most depraved parts about her opening up to him, revealing that these things happened to her, and him not only declining to basically reciprocate her emotions about the situation, but he is neglecting her, and he's also, like I said, basically saying that she could be lying about the situation. So it's really heartbreaking that she does open up to him about something like that, like a tragic thing happening to her. And then JR basically neglects her and then hurts her by having had that done to her, which is really like a double heartbreaking situation. I mean, just for that event to have occurred to her in the first place is really heartbreaking. But the fact that now she's opened up to him and he is neglecting her and accusing her of possibly being a liar, yeah, that's just really sad. And another part of how JR is divided as a person is the scene right now. Basically, the group of friends are hanging out, and they had two random girls that came over, and they're hanging out with them. And yeah, I mean, it's basically presented as they're just like being jerks, and that they are I don't know, like just kind of follows the representation of like guys being guys and everything. Uh, but it also presents the fact that JR is honestly pretty inconsiderate towards women, which I think that he genuinely like wants to love women and not probably be that way, which adds into the emphasis of him being a divided person. Um, like I was saying earlier, with a girl having a backbone and everything, at this point in the movie, JR has randomly returned to her, which is like early in the morning, and then he's trying to make amends. He apologizes about what happened and everything, um, but then he becomes kind of hostile. He's essentially like acting like he's portraying that something like that, like what happened to her in her past, is not something that he can actually move past from. And this is where I really respect her, is the fact that she doesn't just fold over and basically make it all about him and allow him to act the way that he wants and kind of uh, step all over her. She sticks up for herself and she's like, yeah, that's completely unacceptable. And obviously, she feels horrible about what happened in the past. So the fact that he can't move past that and look at it as a tragic situation, instead, he's judging her for it. It really says a lot about both of them and the way that they're interpreting this situation differently. Uh, yeah, at the end here, they showing all of these different statues and depictions of different things in the church. A lot of them are really gnarly, and I think it really showcases how JR's soul is on fire. But yeah, it's just a really great movie.